Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Exit Podcast. Today's special guest is Perry Marshall, a globally recognized business growth consultant, founder, author, and more. Welcome to the show, Perry. How are you?
Good to be here. We're going to mix it up.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thrilled to death to have you. And thanks so much for making time for us.
So why don't we kick things off with just do the generic who I am, what I do, and a brief overview of that.
I am the engineer who wife was 3 months pregnant, got laid off from engineering, didn't want to move across the country, so went into sales. And I remember thinking, well, that shouldn't be too hard. I met a lot of the sales guys. They don't all seem to be all that smart. And I later found out I was in for 2 years of bologna sandwiches and ramen soup. And, there's a lot of cheap foods like baked potatoes and salsa is another good one.
Oh, very, very inexpensive. On it. That sounds like an interesting. I'll try that later today and see how it
is. and so I floundered badly. I finally got fired from that sales job 2 years later. It was one of those, Perry's really trying and he's got a lot of heart and he's got a baby at home. And boy, we tried so hard to make that work. So a couple things happened. One thing was I discovered direct marketing. I stumbled into a seminar where somebody was talking about advertising. This was in the late 90s, before direct marketing was a common thing. And then when I got fired from the job, I took another job at a company that had a website. And that kind of sets you up for a whole other career that turned in very interesting directions. So you'd kind of wonder, like, well, why does a guy who with an electrical engineering degree who designed speakers for Honda and Chrysler, how does he end up being some kind of a marketing guru? Well, that's how that happened. And the thing about being an engineer was I would encounter salespeople. Like I had a boss, he could get away with saying things that I could never get away with saying. Like, I don't know what magic pixie dust he had, but like somebody had to explain marketing to me in a way that was logical and linear and followed some kind of a process. And it turned out the old school direct marketers were the people that cracked the code for me on how to actually sell something. And there's lots more, but that's kind of how it got started. And I have to say, like, things got pretty bad. Like, about the time that I got fired from that job, we were probably 2 or 3 months from, well, heck, we're just moving back to Nebraska and living in the house, next to your parents and starting over. And I remember I went home for Thanksgiving one time, right in the middle of all that. And my brother-in-law, Brett, who worked on the railroad, he had a son who had gone to the university and he was working on the same engineering degree that I already had. And he goes, Perry, you guys aren't doing too well. So like, I just got a question, like, is it going to really be there for him?
Yeah,
that's the beginning of me.
Well, and it's such a funny trajectory. Both Mike and I are pretty technically minded people, but also we work in the creative world. So I run a design agency and Mike's in the music business. And we, I think there's something to that sort of technical knowledge. So it's funny because I think on its face, a lot of people would go engineer to marketer, and it doesn't seem like a straight path. But I can say, at least in my own experience, having grown up and having the luxury of being just old enough that if you wanted to be on the internet, you had to learn to code. Yeah. I tend to be technical enough now. So as we're moving into this world with AI and all these technologies, like I am able to do a lot more than I would have if I didn't have that sort of quote unquote technical background. I'm not a developer or anything by any means, but having some sort of technical thought and being able to think through things systematically and understand how they work has been a huge boon for us. So I imagine for you, especially, and I'm not sure what time frame we're talking about exactly, but based on your age, you're probably kind of at the cusp of what, went from direct mail into digital marketing. And as somebody who I've also spent many a year working in direct mail and digital marketing myself, and so I remember that transition.
Yeah, well, I got my first email address in 1995, and I wasn't doing any kind of marketing with the internet back then. But in '97, at the end of '97, is when I got that job, and so I had bought some training materials about direct mail and print advertising, and I was starting to wrap my head around, there's this whole other world like mail order catalogs and stuff. Like, I suddenly understood how that worked. And I remember having the thought, hey, wait a minute, a web page is just like a letter. And nobody had told me that. I kind of connected that dot myself. And I thought, I think everything I'm reading about in these newsletters applies to the internet, just in a slightly different way. And that was exactly right. And it was I had been either ahead of the curve or imagined myself to be on the head of the curve. That's a whole other thing, right? You think you're like on the verge of some amazing trend, and really you're just walking a plank into a canyon.
Or 2 years
Well, I will
behind,
say,
and you just didn't know it.
in your defense, we've never lived in a better time for our own truths right now. So, I mean, this is perfect. We are allowed to believe that we were on whatever edge we'd like.
And so for the first time in my life, I really was on the front edge of a trend that really was happening. And it wasn't just a train coming, to run me over. And that was really exciting. And it was a magic carpet ride. And I think it's very appropriate that we're talking about this, because in the last, so I want to show you guys something unexpected. So, you guys ever have one of these, like a Hot Wheels racetrack with a loop?
Yep.
I bought this thing a couple weeks ago because it's a perfect object lesson for what happened with the internet in that time period that we're talking about right now, and also what's happening again with AI. So this, you got the blue straight part coming in and out, and then you got this green loop here.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little context for anybody who's not seeing the video piece of this, which is basically we're looking at a Hot Wheels playset type thing with a track and then like the loop in the middle. So as he's describing it, that's kind of what we're looking at.
Yep, and so before I'd say 1995 was when the internet started to happen. And I'll never forget the day I had just been laid off from my job, which the engineering job that I mentioned earlier. I was driving near Midway Airport in Chicago, and I saw a sign that said Southwest Airlines, www.southwest.com. And I knew what that was, even though I had never been on the internet myself. And about a week later, I got an email address. That's 95. By 2000, everybody was on the internet. And so, to use my little Hot Wheels analogy, before 1995, marketing was this certain way. And then the internet hit, and then marketing completely changed. And after 2000, I would say, even with social media and the things that didn't really exist in 2000, the rules have basically been the same for the last 25 years.
Yeah, and it seems like the stuff that works best from that period is still sort of the stuff that works today. Your Google ads and Facebook marketing.
Yes.
These kinds of things.
But the Hot Wheels car is probably about here, like almost to the halfway point of a complete shift with AI. So ChatGPT comes along and things start to change a little bit. And now we are full swing into a change. And I think that it depends entirely on how you define marketing. And I'll give you two definitions. According to one definition, nothing's changed at all. But according to a more typical definition, 3/4 of it is changing radically. And I don't think people really quite get it yet. And the penny really dropped for me about a month ago. And I'm working on a seminar that we're doing in a few weeks, and it's about equity and selling your company and financing and, raising money and exits and M&A and all that stuff. And I woke up at 3:30 in the morning and I realized most of these companies aren't going to be worth anything unless they take the marketing pivot and redefine what marketing even is. So I'll give you two definitions. If the definition of marketing is all the tricks you use to get people to run through the maze, ring the bell, and get the cheese, if that's what you think marketing is, then marketing is completely, utterly changing to be unrecognizable from what it used to be. And we're just like partly into the transition where it's not even entirely obvious to most people where all this is headed. But I'll give you a different definition of marketing, which is, my definition is, it's the art and science of helping people who need each other find each other. That didn't change, doesn't change, will not change. And the stuff that worked 100 years ago will still work now, but it works on a completely different time scale. And I just don't think most people are ready for this. So let me take a breath here and get some reactions from you guys.
Well, first thing I was just going to kind of maybe add to your metaphor a little bit, because I think that, the Hot Wheels loop-de-loop that we've got, I think you're right, that there was sort of this trend for a long time, and it was print, it was direct mail, it was things like this, things that we held in our hands. Then we went to a digital model. And so we sort of did that loop-de-loop. And what I liked about your metaphor is that you've got this bit of road that's before the changing, and then this bit of road that comes after the changing. So once we've done the loop, now we've come out the other side, and now marketing is a little bit different. And when I'm saying marketing, I believe your definition is more accurate, but I guess I'll use marketing as a word to mean the tactics of reaching these people.
Yes.
So, but what I might do is add to your metaphor by adding a second loop-de-loop. And as you're talking about that we're in this new transition or this new world with AI, I think we're going to have another one of those long adoption curves. So you've got the road between the loops that I think most people are living on. And then I think everybody who's paying attention to AI right now is, a third of the way or almost half of the way around that second loop.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a minute before the rest of the world catches up to that. And so, but it's funny because we're already seeing things change. We had a guy on the show not too long ago that confirmed what we had been doing without even thinking about it, but that we're using ChatGPT and other models like this largely as search engines now. Yeah. So instead of asking Google a question, I'll just ask ChatGPT the question. Hey, I need a lasagna recipe, and I'll go to ChatGPT instead. And so a lot of people are starting to make this transition where even search engines are changing, and Google, of course, is integrating their Gemini model into some of that. And so you're starting to see that change already. But then I look at people that are sort of, I was at a funeral thing this last weekend, and I was talking to my father-in-law, and, he's pushing 75. And for him, he's like, I just want to be able to get the newspaper. I want to know what's going on in my community and stuff like that. So a guy like him has little need for something like AI. And so I think there's sort of this generation, that's probably, I don't know, let's call it 50 and forward, maybe 60, 55 and forward, that isn't going to get the AI thing. But the AI version of doing marketing or whatever is going to be what hits this next generation. And those will be the people who are the adopters, I think.
Well, I think what you're saying buys some time for people who are slow. And, I feel like this is kind of a delicate conversation because it's not really my intention to scare people. I can grab you by the lapels and I can tell you that your whole industry is going to become obsolete. And I might even be right for some people. I just don't feel like pushing you into a lizard brain panic is really the thing. But that said, I think a lot of people are not prepared for how I don't think we are very far at all. Maybe a couple years when an audio book becomes a AI generated choose your own adventure, where like I could easily imagine, um, uh, hello, you just bought Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink. If you give us your LinkedIn profile and your website, we will learn about you and we will tailor Malcolm's new book to you. And would you like
there's
to ask
so
Malcolm a question? Like
And I
I
could
don't
even
think
see a
with
version just
that's
beyond that
already
where it's
here.
right,
Like
right.
the personal AI guy that we had on a while ago, he crafts a website where you can upload your own resume, everything about you, that our conversation on this podcast, and then you can go and have it be your personal AI for people who have questions for you. Scott Galloway does this with his podcast, and he gets millions of emails a day from people, and he can't physically reply to them, but his AI does, and it gets a close enough version to that to where it solves that problem.
Yeah, even former podcast guest Chris Doe also has this. He has the Doe bot now, and same thing. He's getting lots of email requests, but everybody's asking kind of the same questions. So he trained it on 10 years or 12 years of YouTube videos and all this other stuff that he's developed over all these years. And now basically he's got what he calls the Doe bot, and you can just go ask it anything you want, and it'll give you all the insights as if it was him. So, but I can even see things going one step further, where based on your preferences, maybe a Netflix type or something like that just creates a show for you. Like it's not based on anything; it's strictly for you.
Yes,
So we all have our own feed,
And I have a friend named John Fox who says his definition of marketing is anything that you do before you actually can get face to face with a customer or talk to them in person. Well, that's a pretty good definition. And he said all of that is getting flattened because the ability to tell a story is now commoditized. So my wife the other day, she bought some kind of yoga thing on Perplexity, and she described exactly what she wanted. It took it to some website, and she made a payment. Maybe she even paid Perplexity. I don't quite remember, but it was like a straight line from the question to the product sale without a dog and pony show or a song and dance or really even much of a decision-making process. And so what I want to emphasize is it doesn't make the real definition of marketing go away at all. There's still an art and science of helping people who need each other find each other, but there's just a whole lot of layers that become unnecessary if a person can ask a sufficiently precise question about what they want, or as long as they know what they want or know what they should want, which is a whole other, a whole nother question, of course. But I don't think most people have accounted for this. And I think most sales funnels are based on content creation models and information marketing models that are 20 years old, and the expectation of what something like that should be has already shifted. So for example, in the early 80s, FedEx came out with commercials that said if it absolutely positively has to be there overnight. The minute that FedEx existed, it now made no sense at all that some mail order company said, please allow 4 to 6 weeks for delivery. It just, the existence of one thing obliterated another thing that wasn't even directly related. And so what AI is doing is, if Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT can do it in 30 seconds, then there's an automatic leap in expectations. I don't need a human to do that for me anymore. And this should not be hard. And so, and the expectation goes way up. So I think white papers have been a great lead generation tool since the late 90s, and they even before that. Well, now your white paper needs to specifically solve your problem and deal with your specific scenario, because now your white paper is a GPT. Now, I think there's a big opportunity for marketers here, and I want to lay out what it is. So I'll give you a specific example of a specific client who just sold their company. So the client is Solar Quotes Australia, which is owned by a guy named Finn Peacock. And about 2 years ago, he came to I had an AI seminar, and he came to that seminar and he said, I am going to build a customer service chatbot for people who are installing solar power in Australia. And so they curated their database and they built a chatbot, and they made it so support ticket gets opened. Chatbot answers the question. The answer goes to a person first. The person has to thumbs up, thumbs down. If it's thumbs up, it goes right back. If it thumbs down, it goes in the reject pile. And then they go fix the rejects every week, and they make their database better, and they train the bot. So what this did, this made customer service 30% more efficient and less expensive. It made the customer service job more interesting, because in managing a bot rather than just answering the same stupid questions over and over and over and over again. And that's obvious enough, but there's a couple things that are not obvious that I think are super powerful. One of them is they now have the best solar power chatbot in the world. And it's way better than ChatGPT or Google or Gemini. Why? Because those huge platforms, the best they can do is average together solar power information from 1,000 different websites, which has conflicting points of view and conflicting philosophies and different voltage levels. And I don't think it's realistic that Google or ChatGPT is ever going to be a really good curator of information that you need when you're using 480 volts of electricity and somebody could get killed or your house could burn down. And I don't think Google or ChatGPT is ever going to decide to enter that market. So Finn owns that market, and he's ahead of every other solar power company. And the better his chatbot gets, the more people use it. And the more people use it, the better it gets. And what I just described can be done by anybody, any subject matter expert who has a body of work and a distinctly unique point of view on a topic. And I do not see very many people doing this. Now, you just described Chris Do and a few other people that they are doing early versions of that. And they're public figures, and so they have a big audience. But I don't think you even have to be a public figure in order to do this. You just have to have a very, very distinct point of view.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that lends itself to sort of a theory that I have for sort of the future of things. You mentioned earlier not wanting to scare everybody off with all this AI talk,
Yeah.
And I think that that's a better way to be, is a little bit more on the positive side. But I work as a visual designer. I work in the creative realm. We do advertising, marketing, all that kind of stuff. And so for people like me that are, getting into our mid 40s and then going, well, shoot, what am I going to be doing at 55? Like, is there going to be a job for me? Because, the kind of work we do, could easily be replaced by computers within 10 years at the rate things are moving.
Yep.
Minimally, all the production work and the low level work that just gets done to spin up a social media ad or whatever, that kind of stuff could basically disappear. The way that I'm either Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say that, like, look at like SEO, look at like Facebook marketing ads, look at all these different things that have come and kind of gone by the wayside. Literally overnight, you can be doing something and Facebook updates their algorithm, or Google changes things, and now your entire SEO platform that you've built or your Facebook marketing thing it changes overnight, and you lose your revenue stream because of one simple update.
Yeah.
It's happened multiple times. The whole thing is you have to be able to pivot and
Well,
overcome and
adapt.
adapt.
And I think that that's where I get back to Perry's point, is that my assumption is that there's always going to be a place for expertise. And so in your parlance, for having a unique perspective or point of view, which is that if you want a Picasso, you're going to go to Picasso. You're going to hire that guy because he does the thing that you want, right? And there's going to be, I think, some social status around, oh, I got that guy to do this thing for me. And so I think as it pertains to marketing and advertising and things like that, there are obviously thought leaders and stuff in design. There are people who are design leaders and people who have, unique styles and things like that. And of course you can emulate and things like that, but I think there will become some value to getting the guy, or getting the lady who is the one who is the expert, who does this thing, who invented this style or whatever it is. So I think that there's a positive or an upside for a future of design, which is that some things actually could be made better because the competition will now be human on AI, and it'll be, hey, I'm the guy that invented that. So there's some maybe social score or social credit in using the person who's the expert. And then I think we're going to become combating basically just noise. I think at some point things are going to become so easy to generate that they become so noisy that we just tune out everything except for the things that are truly unique.
Yeah. So this is a shift. So I have a book called 80-20 Sales and Marketing, and 80-20 it is everywhere. It's a law of nature. It's a law of the universe. And it's not the numbers 80 and 20 that are so important. It's the fact that there is a asymmetry between cause and effect. 20% of the causes produce 80% of the effects, and 80% of the causes produce 20% of the effects. And one of the effects that the internet does, most things on the internet are not 80-20, they're 90-10. 10% of the players get 90% of the business rather than 20% of the players getting 80% of the business. So everything on the internet is even more unequal. So let me give you specific examples of that back what you just said. So Spotify and YouTube make Taylor Swift as close to free as you can get. Therefore, Taylor Swift tickets cost $600. That's exactly what you just got done saying. So if they can get the virtual version of you and they like it, they will pay top dollar to the 10% that are at the tippy top that are desirable. And there's a big business to be had there. And it is showing up in person, in the flesh, dancing on a stage, singing into a microphone, doing the show or painting the Picasso or whatever. And so I think creators need a two-part strategy. They need a Spotify presence, if you will, and they need a concert. And if you can get above a certain size, you can get above a certain gravity level, then the free stuff makes the paid stuff all that much more valuable. But you have to have a unique point of view. Taylor Swift doesn't just play country music. She does it a very particular way with a very particular style and a very particular point of view. And the same's true of the Solar Quote guy. Australia is a different country than other places. Their voltages are different. The sunlight is different. And they positioned themselves to be number one in a growing market with a unique point of view. And that's really the punchline. I think a lot of people are trying to define themselves too broadly, and then you're just going to get lost in the noise.
Yeah.
Well, my thoughts on the whole Spotify thing are more negative than positive.
Well, you're in the music business.
Yeah, back in the day, the music was the commodity. Now you literally have to go and be the dancing puppet on stage to make the money. And that money is split 80-20 to the venue. And then you got a merch split. And then they're literally taking everything that used to generate revenue for the artist. And now it's essentially free. And the highest paid person on Spotify is the CEO over Taylor Swift, Rihanna, every single top artist combined is making less than what the CEO is getting every year. And that to me is a problem. But, sidestep, that's not what we're talking about here.
Well, I would say the sort of like the art example of this, right? Just to kind of use art as a metaphor, since I brought up Picasso, would be like, so your NFT or your JPEG is your free version, right? Somebody just grabbed a picture of something and took it off the internet. The second version, the low tier, the cheap, is your print. You have painted a painting and now you've reproduced it in a way that people can buy it for $10 or $20 and throw it on the wall. And then your high dollar, your premium, your Taylor Swift on stage is the original of that piece. Yeah. Right. So you're sort of able to hit those different markets. But one thing that
it's like vinyl these days, it's the trendy thing, and it's what artists are doing to actually get music sales is because
get back into the money business again.
It's vinyl.
But where I think that is really interesting, or maybe it's where we could spend a minute talking, is so there's a gap though. So I mean, the unique point of view I think is correct, but there's a lot of people with unique points of view that we never hear from. And like in the music business, you've got a million guys in their garage right now that are every bit as talented, every bit as opinionated, every bit as whatever. But the gap is, and maybe this is what you're talking about, the 90-10, which is, Taylor Swift is bogarting 90%, while these guys are getting their 10, Yeah. And so maybe in terms of like how we turn this into a business conversation is how do we go about grabbing back or clawing a little bit more of that, piece of the pie back if we don't have the voice, right? There's still got to be some marketing techniques or some way of getting out in front of people. Social media is obviously a channel and there's others, but.
So here's where most marketers really don't get it. Most marketers think that it's about all of the mechanisms that cause people to run through the maze, ring the bell, and get the cheese. Like that it's about all the techniques. Well, no, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to carve off a slice of a market that has a problem that nobody is addressing, so that you are the number one person in that market. And people don't realize that being number one in a teeny tiny sliver of a market is way more profitable than you think it is. And it's way more profitable than being number 400 in a huge market. Most marketers are number 400 in a huge market, and they're eating baked potatoes and salsa, frankly. If you can identify a problem that nobody is solving and you are the only person that solves it, even if it's just for owners of Vietnamese potbelly pigs, you'd be surprised how much money there is to be made being number one in Vietnamese potbelly pigs.
Mm-hmm. I actually think that that's a great bit of perspective to talk about too, because I do think that just given the prevalence of media and the fact that everything is kind of shoved down everyone's throat all the time, I think it does feel overwhelming. Like, how am I ever going to catch up? I mean, God, look at all these people doing this stuff or whatever.
Right.
And so to your point, it's not even necessarily so much about niching, but the size of the market maybe. So it is a good way to look at it, which is that, these, or I guess it's kind of like the whole, there's someone for everyone kind of thing, like somebody for everybody.
Yeah.
It's like, I think that you could be really successful. And I think, there's the old saying or the thing about the 1,000 true fans. Right. And I think that the point of that whole metaphor is, or that whole concept is that basically, with 1,000 true fans, you can basically build your career. And I think for small musical act or whatever, you could do that with 1,000 small fans. But to your point, that 1,000 people will carry you all the way. They'll buy every album, they'll buy every whatever,
Right.
they'll do this and that because they're your people, right? And so I think back to your earlier definition of, what is marketing? I think this is that, right? Marketing is a relationship with people. And so by you finding your niche or your little sliver, you can identify with a group of people who are your people. And I think that's okay. I think that we spend a lot of time chasing this bigger picture, like I need to be the biggest thing in the country, or I need to be the biggest thing on the planet, when it's like you could be the biggest thing in, Farmington, Utah here, and do quite a bit with that.
For a while, I was pursuing a software application that was specifically designed for people in the DJ world to provide your client interactions and booking and all that stuff. And I went out to raise some capital to get it built. And after the pitch and everything, the feedback that I got was that the market was too niche, that there's no, why would you go after, a small demographic, like just in the music industry like that. And my thought was like, I don't really care if, like, yeah, I was the guy that was like the investor dude that I was pitching to, he was thinking, go after everyone. And my thought is like, this is what I do. I know I'm in this industry and I know that there's a need for it.
The investor dude, A, didn't understand marketing, and B, didn't understand the market, which is even more important than understanding marketing. Like, he was wrong. I know that he was wrong. In fact, if I might suggest the way that you might circumvent that, because you're going to get that from people who don't know a market. I was consulting with somebody about a month ago. They had a plan to make a software for a medical procedure, and I said, he's a doctor. I said, go to your hospital or go to some hospital and tell them I'll have the software ready for you in a year and I'll sell it to you at half price if you'll write a check for me today. I said, if you get 2 checks from hospitals, you'll get an investor to pay for the software development, because you just proved to them that there's a market for this. Now, what was interesting about that conversation was then he had to figure out, well, who at the hospital is going to write the check? And if it's an administrator, you have to prove some kind of cost savings, and not just that it makes a process easier for a surgeon. And he realized that he did not have that worked out. And I find this is true many, many times when people raise money, is they said something that convinced an investor that sounded like a really good idea, but they didn't actually have a product that would connect with an actual customer that they would write a check for. And I've made this mistake myself a bunch of times. About 15 years ago, I started a company called Fanalytics, and it was a company that did what Facebook now everybody knows it does now. But Facebook wasn't doing it back then. And our software would go, it would look at all of your fans that were on your webpage, and it would figure out what they like, and it would tell you all these patterns so that you could figure out where to advertise and everything. And so it was really cool. And we had a whole bunch of people tell us, oh, that's awesome. And so then we spent a whole bunch of money developing the software. And when we went back to everybody that said they liked it, nobody would actually write us a check. It was just one of those weird things where just because they think they like it doesn't mean they would actually spend money on it. And the whole thing went belly up. So I've made that mistake a bunch.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, like in Mike's case, right? I mean, I just did a quick little chat GPT thing here while we were talking. it says that there's about 150,000 DJs that are making a living, and that could be part-time or better living across all genres, right? Wedding DJs, party guys, etc. Just for simple math. So let's say you grab 50,000 of those, so not even, you just take a third of the audience. There's not a lot of competition in the software Mike was looking to build. So if you built a really good tool and you grabbed a third of that audience, let's say they pay $100 a year. You're at $5 million a year right there.
Yeah.
That's pretty decent money off a little software platform for a little niche. And it's more than enough for a little Mike here.
Yeah.
And so even with a small team to keep that thing going, you know what I mean? And so it's so it's funny. So your point about just people not knowing their audience or whatever is the thing. And maybe the bigger thing there is that, maybe it was a gift that he waited, because nowadays you could accomplish this piece of software without VC funding and all this other stuff, probably, at a fraction of the cost of even just a few years ago when he was doing that.
I think so. You're right.
But I can tell you one thing, though, is I did take that feedback and I've kind of pivoted a little bit. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't want some dude to jump on ChatGPT and go for it. But I took his constructive feedback, even though it was kind of flawed in my idea, because that was 3 years ago. If we had the software working right now, it could be generating revenue. But at the same time, like as to Ryan said, now I can kind of take that and do it myself, quite frankly, and do it on a broader scale and maybe open it up to other demographics as well. So.
Yeah. And I think, this is a little bit theoretical, but my assumption is that as AI and all these things continue to ramp up, we will more and more strive for human opportunities, things to go do in person and stuff like that. So I would imagine your audience of DJs isn't shrinking. It's probably growing. You're going to have, the whatever, what's that Tesla robot, the Optimus DJ or whatever, like you'll get one of those, here and there. But I think that people are still going to look for like visceral human stuff. And I think that, so I think an opportunity, like for Mike, I don't think his software is going to be put out of business by AI, for example.
Well, Mike, I want to pick up on what you said about, the Spotify CEO and all the venues are sucking up all the money for the artists. So I want to bring this full circle. In the late 80s, I was the sound man for a band in Lincoln, Nebraska that was trying to make the scene. And so we recorded an album and I was a mixing engineer and we did shows and so I have a perspective on what promoting a band was like in 1988. My son has a band now, and they just spent a few $1,000s recording a couple of tracks and getting them on Spotify and Tidal and everything. And if I sit here and I go, would you rather be promoting a band in 1988 or 2025? I would still pick 2025 because I remember the leader of our band went to somewhere, like there was some slightly famous person there. I don't know if it was a record store or where it was. And he like gives them this demo tape and like, hey, I've got this band. Would you listen to this tape? And that's literally as far as you can get it. Like, well, we made our shot, everybody. And again, we were in Lincoln, Nebraska, and there's not much of a music scene in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so, maybe the guy would have had to move to Nashville or something. If I compare that to what my son is doing, like, well, one thing my son's got going for him is they do a great live show. They're very tight. It's a very good band. And they have friends and they can get 60 or 80 people to show up when they play. I'm like, well, now the Lincoln, Nebraska band, they could get 60 or 80 people to show up. But my perspective is that if you're really serious now, you have so many more tools. Like I think 90% of the people that are in any endeavor, they're out there and they have a YouTube channel or they have some songs or something, but they're not actually serious. I think if you're serious now, you can get farther now, easier So that's just my opinion, and I'm
I
not in the
think
music
there's
business. What do you think, Mike?
I think there's a lot of resources that make things easier. I mean, you got digital sound cards. If you jump on the YouTube wormhole, you can create your own album without paying 50 grand to go into the studio like you had to in the 80s.
Yeah.
But it also lowers the quality of the music because you don't have the ear that the Grammy winning producer has. So that
Yes.
sets you apart. But if you want to get a demo in front of someone and start building something, it's a lot easier to do. And there's avenues to get your music out there. Your music isn't the revenue anymore. It's the glorified business card. You print a
Yes.
CD to get your logo in front of someone, and they might actually have a CD player in their car to actually play it. Most people don't these days.
Right.
So it's like it's such a weird kind of place because really your income stream is ticket sales or merch, or you know, you have to be really creative to get the revenue because there's no other
Right.
alternative. And a
Yeah.
lot of the venues that are starting out, like you'll have a 6-piece band going in, and the venue's only going to pay them $300 to come and play for the night, and now you're splitting $300 6 ways, and it just doesn't make sense to be in a band.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of
Yeah, no,
it's a
I was
hard
gonna
market
say,
to be in.
it's a funny thing though that you mentioned CDs. So my kids are big music guys, like I was, and they follow a lot of different rappers and stuff like that. So they buy merch from these different guys. They have bought 3 CDs from 3 different guys, like Kendrick Lamar, Tyler the Creator. You know, all these guys. They sell these little box sets that come with a T-shirt and a sticker and a this and that, right? But they all come with a CD. We don't have a CD player in the house. I mean, I guess unless you count the PlayStation or something. And so the CD never actually gets played. They just put it on a shelf somewhere like decoration, you know?
Mhm.
And
Well,
so it's funny. They don't even need it. They got all the music on Spotify or whatever. They don't need
same
this.
thing with my record
So-
collection. You know, I don't even carry records. I mean, I can go and do a live show
Yeah,
with
but you don't
records, and
have
that sets you apart. That's great, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the records these days, they buy the record and they'll play it on their thing, but it's the tangible item of having the artwork in front of you and having the
Yes.
lyrics and the, you know, that sets it apart than this JPEG on a Spotify.
Well, that's one of the things I
playlist.
tell my boys all the time is, you know, when I was a kid, the experience of I have $20 in my hand. I'm going to the record store. CDs come out on Tuesday. I've got to pick one on the wall because I only have enough money for one of the 10 releases that are dropping today.
That's
And
right.
then when you get it, you flip it. You know, you're looking through the leaf notes. You're looking under the CD tray to see if they hid something. You know, is there a mystery track at the end of the album or something? You know, there's all these like tactile experiences that we used to have that we just don't now with digital. So it's kind of cool actually that they're going back to,
Mhm.
you know, physical media.
Mhm.
So, but I wanted to just add a couple points to your sort of band metaphor there, which was first, I think one thing, and we've kind of talked about it in a couple ways on this episode already, which is the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? So the good news is what it took to be a good band in 88 is what it takes to be a good band today. You still have to be good. You have to play tight. You have to be a good performer. You have to network your butt off. You have to market yourself. You have to do all those things, right?
Yep.
But, you know, to your point about maybe it's a little better to do it today, I would say it's kind of, you know, the same plus, which is, you know, or the same pro model, which is that, you know, you have to do all those things, but now you have some new tools, right? You can record in your house instead of having to pay an engineer to get a demo across the desk somewhere. You can email somebody because you can find an A&R rep's email address instead of having to, you know, push a CD in front of somebody. Or like I have a band I used to manage that had the guy that did the singing had a band but he worked for a major record company. And so he slipped his band's record in with all the A&R stuff. And that's how they got signed.
We've
Right. It was
interviewed
because
him.
basically he was able to slip his record in, but if it wasn't for his own he wouldn't have been able to get his stuff in front of anybody,
Yeah.
you know? So, I mean, so some of that kind of stuff used to go on, but then, so the other thing I wanted to say, though, that's maybe the double-edged sword. And so maybe this is your point about people who are serious and people who aren't. So this is maybe where the business metaphor is if you're serious, you're out, you're doing all these things, you're taking advantage of all these tools, but you're perfecting your craft. You're out there working, you're honing your message. You know, what is it that makes you unique? All the things we've talked about. But I think there's this trap with the ease of getting to things. So ease of social media, ease of placing an ad, ease of, you know, tweeting something out, ease of, you know, sending an email to a list of people you don't really know. You can do all these things that you couldn't do in 88 very easily, but those things all carry with them this energy that feels like you did something. And I think sometimes you can feel like you did something, even though you didn't really do anything. right? So you sent a tweet out, and so you're like, okay, done for the day. I got my tweet out. We're set. Somebody's going to come around now. We got our tweet out. But the reality is you didn't really do anything. What you should have done is gone down to your, one surviving local music store and networked, or you should have been at the concert venue for the show that night and networking with the people running the venue, or
Back in the day,
whatever it is. But but I think that there's the trap of simplicity, which is things feel easier and in fact are easier, but I think it can also trick you into thinking you're doing more than you're doing.
Back in the day, DJs that were actually mixing would make a demo tape, and they would go out and they would literally hustle on the street as cars were driving by. Hey, $5, I got the CD, and literally drumming up business by getting out there, knocking on windows, and trying to promote their music in a busy street. And you have street performers now that there's a guy on YouTube that I follow that he'll go and he'll set up and he'll do a live performance, and he has a sign that says "Sing with me" or whatever, and then he'll get people to come in and sing with him, and he records it and puts it on YouTube. And he's probably making more off of his YouTube revenue than he is off of anything else, just because he's thinking outside of the box and creating something different. And it's the guys that get out and hustle and actually work hard that are going to stand out from the rest of the people out there.
Yeah. So those are the guys that, at least in the way that I'm talking about it, those would be your people who are serious, right? That's the guy that's really out there trying to make a living doing this. They're all in, we're not dinking around with this thing. We're not just, tweeting from the couch. Like, I'm out, I'm hustling, I'm working. And I think so, as it pertains to business, I think that's kind of what it is, right? I mean, the people who are serious about business are out doing all those things. They're not just sending the tweet and wishing.
I want to interject another factor let's introduce another piece, which is, I have this saying, one long shot and 3 fish in a barrel. And what I mean by that saying is, when you're in any kind of business, you should have one thing where you're swinging for the fences and it's got a low probability, but it might hit. And you should have 3 things that are just going to work. And one of the things that's easier to do now by far than it was 20 or 30 years ago is to do 2 completely different careers. One of them, which is shooting fish in a barrel and makes you money. And the other, which is, well, I've got this band. I think having a band categorically is a lousy way to make money.
Oh yeah,
it's a great way.
As a guy who started out by designing concert posters and then evolving into a place where people couldn't pay me for my concert posters anymore, I can relate.
It's a great way to express yourself. It's a great way to develop your mind and your artistic skills and all the rest. And there's a lot of jobs in the world that will pay well that nobody really wants to do. You be bricklaying or plumbing or carpentry or remodeling or whatever. And the band can be a side hustle. And
well, it doesn't even have to be a side hustle. It can be a passion. If you like playing music, do it. And if you make money, great. If you don't, you're still having fun. That's the fish in the barrel is where the money's at. The music or whatever your passion is, the art, the whatever, that can possibly make you money. But if it doesn't, no big deal.
And the cherry on the sundae is the artistic stuff feeds the business in ways that you cannot predict. If you're out playing the bass on a Thursday night and having a good time and performing on stage, that is generating creative juices that when you go into the office on Friday morning to do whatever it is that you do for a living, I always find that artistic, creative people are better collaborators, better employees. Like Steve Jobs said that out of his top dozen, engineers, designers, coders, every single one of them had a huge place in their life for music. So I don't even think these things compete with each other. I don't think you have to saddle an artistic endeavor with a necessity to make a profit. I think there's a 1 + 1 = 3 thing where I bake a lot of, you could call it playtime, into what I do. I do science projects. I design stereo equipment. I read books. I do all kinds of interesting things. And I don't regard those things as being in competition with my main day job. I regard those things as feeding the creativity engine and giving me new ways of thinking about things. So I think it's very 1 + 1 is 3.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that, making time for those kinds of things is probably a valuable thing. I think it's one thing that we've kind of learned from doing this podcast. I mean, you'll be episode or interview 400 and something. Yeah. And, in these last 8 years of talking to all these different business leaders and stuff, the one thing we found is that really everybody's creative. There's not like this class of people who are creative and a class of people who aren't. We've noticed that there's sort of this thread that runs across everybody that's all just about application. It's how are you applying that creative juice that you're talking about, right? Either I'm using it to build a new business, or I'm using it to grow a new audience, or I'm using it in the content I'm creating, or I'm using it whatever, but that it's the same juice, right? And so it's not like, the creative guy that can just maybe sit and draw a picture, even though you couldn't draw a stick figure. Like it doesn't matter. Your creativity is being expressed in a different way. And so, so I think that's a good thing. And I think that just as people, it's important that we, are allowed to express that in one form or another.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of getting to that time. Do you want to tell people how they can reach out to you, talk about your book? Closing
if you
thoughts.
go to perrymarshall.com, you can sign up for a daily email called the Perry Marshall Minute. It's always provocative. And the book, 80/20 Sales and Marketing, everybody who works should read this book. Why? Because 80/20, if you were listening carefully earlier, the 20% is not 4 times more effective than the 80. It's 16x. There's a very few things that you do in your life that produce a huge amount of results. And most things most people do don't produce much of anything. And if you go to perrymarshall.com/podcast, you can pick up this book for $7, including shipping, and it will totally change your life. And, maybe you're a musician, like my son, Kyler, has a band, and he thinks 80/20 about everything. 20% of the people who came to your show tonight have 80% of the enthusiasm, spend 80% of the money, do 80% of the viral marketing for you. There's levers everywhere. So perrymarshall.com/podcast.
Sweet.
Cool. Well, yeah, no, it was a lot of fun, Perry. Really appreciate you taking the time to sit and visit with us. And, fun that we got off on a little musical tangent. Both Mike and I are big in that.
So. Whenever I do podcasts, I always think, I hope we have an interesting tangent today. So
yeah,
that was fun.
And I'll tell you what, I think music is just one of those things that's like, it's a tangent, but I think it's something that most people can relate with. And so, and it makes a strong metaphor for anything, especially if you've ever worked around bands, then you understand what it's like to be a small business owner, so to speak.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, well, thank you so much, Perry. Appreciate you. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.